In this video, I'm going to talk about educational video making. Essentially, I'll be talking about the reasons why making educational videos is something that teachers, lecturers, and more in general, all educators would like to know something about. The video is structured as follows. In the first part, I will try to explain the reasons why videos are a very important tool in teachers or lecturers' toolbox. In the second part, I'll be talking about the few pieces of equipment that we may need to use in order to make educational videos. Mostly, I'll be talking about what in jargon is called the shooting phase. In the last part of the video, I'll be talking more about the last part of video making, which is when we edit the videos that we made. Before I start with giving you the reasons why I think that video making is something very useful for educational purpose, I want to make one thing very clear. Video making is an art, and it's a very complex one. I don't think that teachers, lecturers, and all other educators can actually have all the skills required to make perfect videos. As a matter of fact, we have to be at the same time operators, directors, and performers. These are all aspects that would require skills that it's virtually impossible to have in one single person. But at the same time, I think that adding educational videos to our teaching practice is something that is extremely valuable, especially when we have online courses, or more in general, when we are dealing with online education. So this video is a sort of invitation or an encouragement for you to start making videos. And that's why I thought that going through some of the main elements of video making can be helpful. Because the objective is not to make cool videos, but is to start making videos that might be helpful for our learners and students. When I started my online teaching practice, in other words, when I started teaching online, my main preoccupation was how can I share the things that I understood concerning the topic of the course. This was actually a rather big deal because until then I basically taught in a very traditional way, which meant that basically I was meeting the students either every week or every second week for frontal lectures. I had the chance, in other words, to be in touch with people, with my students, and to have the opportunity to tell them something, which is, I think, what basically a lecture is for. But when it comes to online teaching, this should be partly or even entirely rethought and reorganized. Because obviously, in an online course, we don't have the chance to be in the same room with the students. So the very first thing that starting my online teaching practice prompted me to do was to find an alternative. When I started, I used webinars, in other words, online meetings, to, let's say, lecture my students a little bit about the topics of the course. This was, of course, a partly viable option because I could, in fact, lecture. I could tell the students what I wanted them to know. But what I noticed was that, unfortunately, the webinar, at least the webinar format, wasn't so conducive to this type of teaching activity that I used to do in the past, essentially lecturing. The problem is that webinars cannot be compared to the situation in which we get together in the same environment and the teacher basically starts doing the lecturing bit. So I obviously had to find an alternative to this. One option was simply to ditch the lecturing bit and provide the students either with a provoking question to think of and then to later discuss during the webinars, or alternatively design some kind of learning materials that could be helpful once again for a discussion to be conducted during a webinar. I wasn't so happy with this option because I actually felt as a lecturer that I had to share my own understanding about certain topics. I thought that the lecturing bit was still something very important, something conducive to learning for my students, especially because the topic of my courses were usually rather theoretical. I used to teach philosophy of educational technology, the role of tinkering in educational technology, and critical issues of technology use in education. All these courses were rather theoretical, and I felt that the students needed some kind of introduction or some kind of triggers that would later animate the discussions in the webinars. That's why I decided, since early on, to use videos. For me, the video format was the best way to introduce topics, to raise critical issues, as well as to do a bit of lecturing. So my videos were essentially short video-based lectures that would function in the general course as triggers for then webinars to be conducted together with the students. So for me, the video format was essentially the instrument through which I could convey my own understanding about certain topics, and interestingly enough, it would be a sort of trigger for the discussions to be conducted during the webinars. The students would actually raise issues in the forum before the webinars, and I would then use those issues as starting point for our conversations in the Zoom. So essentially, the main function that videos have in my teaching practice, in my online teaching practice, is that of providing video lectures. My videos are usually rather long, up to 45 minutes, but the reason why they are pretty long is because for me these are moments in which I help students understand the topics that I really care of and that are at the center of the courses that I'm teaching. Of course, when it comes to videos, one obvious question would be, why do we need videos? Isn't it that we can accomplish the same thing through, for example, written texts? Is there any rule of thumb that we can make use of to decide whether to make a video or to write a text? Well, essentially there are no such rules, but we can discuss the reason why the video format could be considered superior to other formats. The very first reason why I think that videos are particularly helpful in education is that they rely on something that humanity has developed since early on, especially in our own species, the Homo sapiens sapiens, which is orality. In other words, spoken language. Verbal language can be considered a tool in itself, most likely the most powerful tool that we have ever developed in the course of our evolution. Orality is still the main tool that we use to communicate, in spite of the fact that written language has indeed an important function. But why is it that orality is important? When it comes to information theory, there is one single word that I would like you to keep in mind, which is redundancy. What is redundancy? Well, in economic jargon, being redundant means that somebody is useless in a given organization, which means that usually if you're redundant in a company, it means that you're going to be laid off. But in information theory, redundancy means essentially that we are trying to convey the same very piece of information, but in different ways. Now, this particular interpretation of the term is very important in teaching and learning, because redundancy is precisely what helps learners understand what we're trying to teach them. Redundancy is, for example, what virtually all teachers employ, whether they are aware of it or not, when, for example, they try to describe and redescribe the same very topic, for example, in different language or in different formats. And this is exactly what the video format can accomplish. In other words, when we're teaching something, we want to essentially provide different perspectives on the very same thing that we are teaching. This is exactly what I've just done now. I'm trying to explain to you what redundancy is, and therefore I try to define it, I try to redefine it using different words. And if it's possible, and this is the case of the video format, I can actually use different visuals. So, for example, I can now use my verbal language skills to describe and redescribe what redundancy is, but I can also make use of a footage, a video, a drawing. If there is one thing, as I said, that the video format accomplishes, and that does very well, is precisely the creation of this type of redundancy that is fundamental when it comes to teaching and learning. So to summarize, what the video format allows us to do is to precisely create redundancy. Because first of all, we can rely on a powerful tool, which is verbal language, which allows, as I just said, to basically produce different verbal descriptions concerning the concepts that we're trying to explain. Secondly, it allows us to combine verbal descriptions of the concepts that we want to teach with all sorts of visuals. Now, this is precisely where digital technologies, the kind of digital technologies that we have at our disposal in the current times, really allow us to do very well. Because I can take a camera, I can shoot a video with myself speaking about a certain topic, and at the same time I can add visual to the clip that I shoot. Another way to state the same very thing about redundancy is the famous saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, how about a video? Well, probably we may say that since a video is composed of many pictures, well, maybe we can say that a video is worth 1,000 pictures. I'm not actually saying that the video format is superior to pictures or words. Actually, the video is superior to just mere pictures or words, because a video is exactly the combination of these two. Before I move on to the next part of this video, which is going to be about shooting educational videos, I would like to briefly list a number of types of video that we may consider when it comes to education. As I have already mentioned, in my own online teaching practice, the video format has the main purpose to essentially introduce topics and explain different concepts. So in my case, I would say that videos are mostly video lectures. That's why I'm very much interested in combining orality with all different types of visuals that can help my students understand a little bit more concerning the topics that I'm treating in my courses. But of course, the video lecture is not the only format that you can make use of in your own online teaching practice. This is not the video in which I try to exhaust all the possibilities when it comes to educational videos, but I would like to briefly mention a few options that we all actually have. The first type of video, which is indeed very popular, is the instructional video. Essentially, this is the video that contains a number of instructions that the students should go through in order to master a certain topic or a certain skill. This is very much common when it comes to teaching people how to use a piece of software. I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with this type of video. You just go to YouTube and you just have to look for videos describing how to do something, and there you go. So these videos have the main function to instruct people to do something. Indeed, instructional videos can also be used when it comes to more theoretical topics. In that case, the video is essentially a step-by-step guide which would hopefully make the students understand a certain concept or a certain topic. Usually explainers are very short videos, let's say up to 5 minutes.
Hello.
It's not a kind of, explainers are not lectures, but can be considered a part of a longer lecture. Essentially, these are videos in which you are explaining a particular kind of concept or topic. It's short and concise because it wants to address a certain specific thing that you would like your students to understand. Another very interesting type of video that I would strongly recommend you to consider in your own online teaching practice are conversational videos. These are essentially very popular among YouTubers, and essentially these videos are depicting 2 or more people discussing or better conversing over a certain matter. And this can be easily done via Zoom. During the lockdown, I made several of those videos for my students because I basically had the chance to have a Zoom with a colleague of mine or an expert in a particular field I wanted to talk about, and then you just record the conversation. And with a bit of editing, basically you have a video that has a very important educational value. Why a conversation? Well, because conversations are another very powerful tool, mostly rooted in language, through which we can discuss or provide a dialogue about a certain topic. Every and each of these types of videos have their own context and their own purpose. Of course, in this video, I cannot get too much into this because I don't know so much about your context, but I hope that I explain them clearly enough for you to understand what is the best type of video that you may make use of in your own online teaching practice. As I briefly mentioned in the introduction to this video, the next part will be dedicated to how we shoot videos. I will be basically describing the different options that we have when it comes to shooting videos, which is basically the moment, like this now, in which we actually produce the videos that we're going then to share.